teenage years are the most challenging of all the stages of growing up. Not a child anymore, but not yet an adult. This time can be characterized by the body undergoing a massive hormonal overhaul, further complicating this transitional period. Yesterday's obedient child becomes unstable and prone to rebellion. A teenager's worldview is a picture of contrasts consisting of black and white tones. The prevailing color in the teen's judgments and actions largely depends on their environment. The story we're about to discuss occurred in Medicine Hat in the southeast of Alberta, Canada. Incomprehensible cruelty and betrayal befell the Richardson family. Their tragedy gained national attention, and once again, the Gothic subculture came under fire. In town, the Richardson family was considered exemplary. Deborah and Mark, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, lived in a beautiful and cozy place. Like all Canadians, they were very hospitable and sociable. Their home was often filled with guests, and the atmosphere was built on principles of love and respect. Everything was going well until the eldest daughter entered puberty. The once calm girl changed beyond recognition. First and foremost, Jasmine's character changed. She became bold and frivolous. Conflicts between her and her parents began to occur, and her academic performance dropped. Secondly, her preferences in music and clothing transformed. Whereas she previously enjoyed modern pop, she now took an interest in heavy rock. Bright colors and clothing were replaced by shades of gray and black, and her dressing style became provocative. Jasmine wanted to appeal to boys, so she began to emphasize her rounded shapes. Her interaction with former friends noticeably decreased. She began to spend more time alone in front of her computer screen. The door to her room was often closed. With the introduction of the internet at home, she became interested in Gothic themes, dark poetry, criminal psychology, and human anatomy. Miss Richardson even identified herself as a witch, preaching the Wiccan religion. For this purpose, she visited various websites of similar nature, where she found a circle of friends who shared her interests. "Welcome to my tragic world" was the greeting on her social media page. It seemed like a typical adolescence, spiced with excessive dramatism and mysticism. However, the girl became more and more detached from her family. In her profile, she listed a fictitious name and age of 15. She liked older interlocutors, wanting to match them. Her parents tried to support their daughter during this difficult period, suggesting spending time together. They looked for common ground and activities. However, she found this uninteresting. Jasmine considered her younger brother to be an annoying nuisance. Thus, she spoke to him less and less. Yet she could spend hours on end at the computer talking to strangers. Deborah and Mark understood that this state was temporary. She would grow up and become wiser. Therefore, they were quite tolerant of her new hobbies. One day, Jasmine told them she would like to go to a concert of a punk rock band. Her parents agreed. If only they knew what this outing would lead to. Early in 2006, Jasmine Richardson went to a concert of a local youth band, pursuing her own interests, knowing he would be there. Jeremy Steinke, the boy who had been stirring her heart for months, was also fascinated by Gothic culture. They met on a vampire enthusiasts website where they occasionally communicated. Jeremy portrayed himself as a 300-year-old werewolf thirsting for blood. To prove it, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, though it was unclear whether the fluid was of human or animal origin. Nonetheless, the boy clearly considered himself special, which Jasmine found very appealing. Meeting at the concert, the young people grew even fonder of each other. Eventually, Steinke asked her out, and she joyfully accepted. All would be fine, except Jeremy was 23 years old. The couple knew her parents would disapprove of their relationship, so they kept it a secret. Moreover, his troubled past would hardly endear him to them. The young man was poor and lived in a trailer with his mother and sister. His relationship with his mother was strained due to her excessive drinking. Jeremy had endured her constant stream of volatile partners who often beat him in their drunken rages. As a result, by the age of 13, he was struggling academically and had a fragile psyche. Once, unable to bear such a life, Steinke attempted to hang himself but was fortunately stopped in time. Afterward, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. Bullied at school, he decided to stop attending. Over time, Jeremy fancied himself immortal and began frequenting websites of similar themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. No one knew about the couple's forbidden relationship except their friends, who found their love, to say the least, peculiar. Their communication would have remained a secret had the Richardsons not started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Deborah and Mark discovered Jasmine was corresponding with strangers, alarming them as any parent would. Therefore, they decided to remove the computer from the girl's reach. Moreover, they were shocked to learn she had fallen for an adult man with dubious interests. His very nickname, Soul Eater, spoke volumes. Thus, Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship became forbidden. To help their daughter break free from this destructive relationship, Deborah and Mark sought a psychologist's help. They sincerely believed that counseling would benefit their parent-child relationship. To their delight, it did. Jasmine showed compliance and seemed to be returning to a normal life, promising that it was all in the past. She got her computer back. This became the Richardsons' last fateful decision, leading to their demise. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Preparing for bed, Mrs. Richardson heard a noise in the basement. Rats again, she thought. Descending, she turned on the light and saw a person in a ski mask. He stood opposite her, looking at her. Startled, she screamed. The stranger rushed at her, covering her mouth. His efforts were in vain. Deborah struggled and screamed louder. He stepped back, drew a knife, and stabbed her in the chest, then again and again. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark rushed down, grabbing the first thing he could find, a screwdriver. He had been fixing an outlet that day and by sheer chance left a tool out. Entering the basement, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife lying in a pool of blood and someone standing next to her. Mark immediately attacked the intruder but received a stab wound to the stomach, followed by more stabs. As the searing pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mr. Richardson quietly asked, "Why?" "Because your daughter wished it," the attacker replied. Upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. The boy sat on his bed in his pajamas, too frightened to move. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and the bedroom door opened. A few days before the murder, Jasmine was overjoyed. Her parents believed in her remorse, meaning they could now communicate again. Mobile phones were just becoming popular at that time, so the computer remained the only means of communication. As soon as Miss Richardson regained internet access, she immediately wrote to Jeremy. "It all starts with them disappearing and ends with us staying together," she told him. During the days when the young lady was visiting the psychologist, a terrible plan had formed in her head. It solidified over several days of punishment. Surprisingly, Steinke found it enticing but added that everything needed to be done creatively and with attention to detail. The couple understood that they could not be together as long as the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends recalled how often she spoke about her parents, particularly how much they annoyed her. Therefore, she wanted to end their lives. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Garrett headed across the street to his friend Tyler's house. The boy wanted to play. The weather was nice outside, despite being chilly. Such was the spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed. No one answered his knock on the door. Strange, he thought. The Richardsons should be home. Their car is parked in the driveway. Hoping to see someone, the child curiously peeked into the living room window but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the basement, where he often played with Tyler. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange on the floor. It appeared to be two silhouettes in a pool of blood. The boy informed his mother. Skeptical, she decided to check on the family across the street. They approached the house together. Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman looked in and recoiled in horror. She immediately called emergency services. Something happened at the Richardsons. They seemed to be lying on the basement floor, all in blood, the neighbor reported. The police arrived promptly. Breaking down the front door, They descended to where Garrett and his mother had seen something. Entering the dark basement, the officers had difficulty recognizing the people lying on the ground. Their bodies were mutilated and bloodied, but there was no doubt. It was Mark and Deborah Richardson, and they were deceased. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, even the ceiling. A bloody mess. No other way to describe what was before them. Later, the police searched the house. In the upstairs children's room, they found a small child. The boy lay in bed among toys, splattered with blood, with visible knife wounds. The child's throat had been deeply cut. Medicine Hat had never seen such horror. One officer said, "It will take me decades to forget what I saw today." After the house was searched, the police realized one family member was missing. The Richardsons' eldest daughter was gone. Officers worried she might be in danger. Everything indicated the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room. The rest of the house was undisturbed, and at first glance, nothing was missing. The state of the body suggested the crime occurred the previous night. Apparently, the perpetrator broke into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. Then what happened to Jasmine? And where was she? The police began to construct theories about what had happened. Perhaps by some stroke of luck, the girl was somewhere outside the home, safe. Or the perpetrator had abducted her and was now harming her. Or maybe a ransom demand from relatives would come with time. However, as time passed, there were no clear answers. Soon detectives turned to the media requesting help in the search for the missing girl. They hoped Jasmine would make contact or someone would provide valuable information. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives, friends, and colleagues about all aspects of the slain family's life. Did they have any adversaries or enemies capable of such a heinous act? However, the more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to wish death upon anyone in the Richardson family. They were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses, and loving parents, except for the eldest daughter. Officers learned that the girl had been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Therefore, the tone of media announcements changed. This time, the investigation wanted to locate a person of interest. It was entirely possible that the girl knew details about the crime, or she might have been involved in it. Considering the suspect's age, the media could no longer publish her real name, as per Canadian law. Thus, news agencies began to refer to Jasmine Richardson as JR. After it became known about her relationship with Jeremy Steinke, the couple was declared wanted. Initially, the search for the young lovers began among their friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding out with them. However, this lead proved to be a dead end for the police, but they did uncover something intriguing. A few hours after the crime, the young couple was spotted at a restaurant and at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Someone from their circle of friends mentioned that Jasmine appeared unchanged. There was no indication she had been abducted or was in a state of shock. She was drinking and having fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed. "Jeremy and I just took care of them." "Yes," the boy agreed. "I carved them up like fish." The party guests laughed, thinking it a grim joke, unaware that the statement was true. The involvement in the crime was also confirmed by a comic found in Jasmine's school locker, where she detailed how she would deal with each of her family members, with her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were distributed widely. It was only a matter of time before a citizen would step forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon enough, information came in. The couple was spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck. Without resistance, they were taken to the police station. Naturally, the couple was interrogated separately, starting with Jasmine. She shared that she was deeply in love with Steinke, and he reciprocated her feelings. However, the difference in age and social status was a barrier between them. According to Jasmine, the Richardsons would never have accepted their relationship. Therefore, Jeremy committed the ultimate act of love. He ended her parents' lives, providing them the chance to be together. When detectives asked if Jasmine was involved in the crime, she said, "I wasn't home when the crimes occurred. I didn't know about what had happened. After I found out, I accepted it. I loved Jeremy very much, so I ran away with him. Detectives needed to determine who was the main instigator. Since breaking the suspects proved difficult, the investigation used a cunning strategy. They placed an informant in the cell with Jeremy, who skillfully extracted details that contradicted Jasmine's statements. Jeremy confessed to the informant that the plan to end her parents' lives was Jasmine's idea. Initially, he was not supportive, but agreed after they discovered the forbidden love and took away her computer. I took care of Deborah and Mark Richardson, and Jasmine took care of her younger brother herself. She literally begged me to leave Tyler for her, though I was glad to settle scores with all of them, Jeremy cruelly revealed. After this confession, investigators confronted Miss Richardson with the recording. She had no choice but to confess to everything, admitting she stabbed her younger brother out of mercy, not wanting to leave him an orphan. Later, the couple shared their social media profiles and passwords with the investigation, which began to examine their correspondence. They had sent each other thousands of messages confirming Jeremy's statements. Jasmine indeed conceived the plan on her own. Steinke wrote that Jasmine was the only person who supported and approved of his tastes, replacing the society he felt alienated from. Fearing he would lose her, he helped realize the dreadful idea. I want to slit their throats. They will regret what they have done, especially when I make sure they're gone. They'll pay for the insults. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood will be the payment. Jeremy supported his beloved. His friends also reported that just a few hours before the attack, they watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, which portrays a couple committing 9 heinous murders. This story inspired their friend, who said he wanted to enact a similar plan with his girlfriend. I think it's the best love story of all time, Steinke said. With sufficient evidence at hand, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives pieced together the confessions of the accused, witness testimonies, and other case evidence to form a clear picture of the crime. Before the act, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine led him into the house and guided him to the basement, where he attacked her mother. Deborah was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body. The deepest wound pierced her chest, reaching 12 centimeters deep and striking her heart. In a rage, Jeremy mercilessly continued his assault on Mark, who sustained 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson was the last to die. While Steinke was dealing with the parents downstairs, Jasmine inflicted 5 stab wounds on her younger brother upstairs. After Jeremy finished, he went upstairs to help his girlfriend with the child, coldly slashing the boy's throat. Afterward, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood while Jasmine caught a taxi to a restaurant where the couple had agreed to meet. After discussing the night's events, they headed to a party. A friend of Jeremy's, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and reach Saskatchewan. Words fail to describe the horror they created. The couple embarked on their murderous spree with such ease and nonchalance as if driven by some otherworldly force. It is shocking that during interrogations and their time in custody, not a word of regret or remorse was uttered for their actions. While detained, they wrote letters to each other calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Steinke proposed to Richardson, who joyfully accepted. Then, unexpectedly, their mad love began to fade like last year's snow. During the trial, they shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson was the first to stand trial. She pleaded not guilty, claiming to have been in a zombie-like state and unable to act while Jeremy was killing her family. She also claimed she only wounded her younger brother, and it was Steinke who delivered the fatal blow. Jasmine insisted that their discussions about ending her parents' lives were purely hypothetical, but they appealed to Jeremy so much that he compelled her to turn them into reality. Under 3 counts of homicide, Miss Richardson was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, thanks to the nuances of Canadian juvenile criminal justice law, which states that individuals under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment. The sentence was aimed more at rehabilitating and restoring the girl's psyche than punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steinke's trial commenced. He insisted he had no initial intention of ending the lives of his girlfriend's parents. However, once discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. He claimed he did not harm Tyler, suggesting Jasmine was responsible while he merely watched from the doorway. The defense argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced him, wishing for him to free her from her parents' strict control. Some friends testified that Jeremy had sought their help with the act, driven by his fear of losing Jasmine to the extent of being willing to do anything. The lawyers also requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, arguing Steinke was under the influence of substances at the time of the act. Steinke's inconsistencies emerged when asked by the prosecution why he committed the act. He replied, "When you find your other half, you do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, he remained indifferent to the proceedings, but broke down when Jacqueline May, his mother, testified in his defense. She admitted to bearing significant guilt for his upbringing, as he was often attacked by her partners, subjected to beatings and rejection. Steinke was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree homicide, receiving 3 life sentences. He would be eligible for parole no earlier than 25 years later, in 2033. Charges of complicity in the act against Casey Lancaster were dropped. In Medicine Hat Court, she was found guilty of obstruction of justice, sentenced to a year of house arrest, and prohibited from consuming drugs and alcohol. While in custody, Jeremy Steinke changed his name to Jackson May. Jasmine Richardson's 10-year sentence included 4 years in a psychiatric facility where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, indicative of a refusal to follow rules and socially unacceptable behavior, typically more associated with children than adults. This underscored her psychological immaturity and instability during her relationship with Steinke. In her final years under conditional community supervision and attending special programs, medical professionals reported her genuine remorse. After serving her full sentence, she was released in 2016. Apparently, Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada under an assumed name. Her true identity is still protected from media disclosure. Her return sparked significant public debate, with some arguing she deserved a second chance while others believed she warranted a harsher penalty. Nonetheless, the residents of Medicine Hat would prefer not to have Ms. Richardson as their neighbor again, given the brutality of her crime. Whether Jasmine has truly changed after spending her formative years in detention remains to be seen. Time will tell. Shannon Dale Verhaeghe was born June 15, 1996. She disappeared just days before her first birthday. Her mother, Rachel Timmerman, was allegedly sexually assaulted by Marvin Charles Gabriel 2 weeks after she gave birth to Shannon in 1996 in Cedar Springs, Michigan. On the night of August 7, 1996, 18-year-old Rachel left a party with then 43-year-old Marvin, family friend, and 2 other men. After stopping in a field, Marvin ordered the other 2 men out of the car and then drove off with Rachel. Marvin then attacked her and sexually assaulted her. According to Rachel's family, the incident had a horrible effect on her both physically and mentally and led to her having difficulties trusting others. Rachel, though terrified of Marvin's retaliation, reported the attack to law enforcement the next day. 2 months later, he was charged in the crime, but authorities couldn't locate and arrest him until January 1998, about a year and a half later. He was then released on bail after 2 weeks. Wayne Davis, one of the men forced out of the car the night Rachel was assaulted, disappeared in February 1997, just days after Marvin was released from custody. Wayne had planned to testify on Rachel's behalf at the upcoming trial. In the months following the assault, Rachel attempted to turn her life around. She began focusing her time on her baby daughter, Shannon, her family, and her work at a local restaurant. She had sent Shannon to live with her paternal grandparents as she began repairing her family relationships during May 1997. She planned to move into her father's home with Shannon during the summer. She took Shannon to her father's residence during the weekend of June 3, 1997 to prepare for the change of custody. However, as the date for the preliminary hearing came closer, Rachel worried about having to testify against Marvin. She told her parents that he had threatened her several times. She also said that she was having recurring nightmares about him and believed that he would kill her. Her father told her that he would help her with the trial. However, according to her parents, on June 3, 1997, Rachel seemed happy. She told her father that she was going on a date with a man and that the man told her to bring Shannon along. This was the last time they were seen, which was just 3 days before she was scheduled to testify under oath against Marvin. Rachel's father received a letter from Rachel or someone posing as her the day after her disappearance. It stated that she planned to elope with an unidentified man and would be in contact with her family in about 2 weeks. 11 days after her disappearance, the prosecutor received a letter that was postmarked from Little Rock, Arkansas. The letter said that Rachel had tried to have intercourse with Marvin, but when he refused, she made up the assault allegation. The prosecutor did not believe that Rachel wrote the letter and believed Rachel was in danger. The same day, Rachel's father also received a letter postmarked from Little Rock. The letter, also allegedly written by Rachel, said that she and Shannon were fine and that she would call him soon. However, he never received that call. Family members grew very concerned and suspicious as Rachel apparently had no plans to marry anyone or travel anywhere. Sadly, 2 weeks later, her body was discovered in Oxford Lake in Manistee National Forest on July 5, 1997, over 1 month after she and Shannon were last seen. Oxford Lake is approximately 70 miles north of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Was no sign of Shannon at the scene and the child has never been seen again. Authorities theorized that whoever kidnapped Rachel forced her to write the letters on June 3rd. After dumping Rachel into the lake, the killer then mailed the letters. From the beginning, there was one obvious suspect, Marvin Gabriel. Authorities went to his residence and found cinder blocks on his property that matched those found tied to Rachel's body. Authorities believe that Marvin killed Rachel to prevent her from testifying against him at trial. Rachel's brother told authorities that Marvin threatened to murder his sister if she testified against him. Investigators determined that Marvin was in Wago County and the Cedar Springs area prior to Rachel and Shannon's disappearance in June 1997. Authorities believe that Rachel's friend, John Weeks, was the unidentified man who picked her and Shannon up from her father's residence prior to their disappearances. He was also an acquaintance of Marvin. John also vanished in June 1997 and has never been located. Authorities brought the FBI to investigate the bizarre case. They discovered that Marvin was using the alias of Robert Allen. An investigation was launched into Marvin's background. Authorities discovered that he was collecting Social Security checks under the name Robert Allen in 1997. Allen was a mentally disabled transient from Grand Rapids and had been missing for some time. Marvin was arrested and convicted of Social Security fraud in July 1998 and was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. He was charged with Rachel's murder in March 2001. Authorities dredged Oxford Lake in May 2001 to recover possible evidence against Marvin, but nothing was located. Authorities stated that keys found in his residence fit the locks placed on Rachel's body. They admitted that the locks, chain, and handcuffs found with Rachel had not been checked for fingerprints. Prints were not found on the duct tape which covered her face. Marvin was convicted of Rachel's murder in early March 2002 and sentenced to death shortly thereafter. His death sentence was overturned on a technicality in 2011, but this was reversed and the sentence reinstated in 2013. The appeals court ruled it was virtually undisputed that Marvin had killed Shannon as well as her mother. While in jail awaiting trial for Rachel's murder, Marvin gave a map of Oxford Lake to another prisoner which he had written the following: body of 3, 1 found. Wayne Davis's body was found in a lake less than a mile behind Marvin's parents' home, 5 years to the day after Rachel's was located. Authorities believe Marvin was responsible for his murder, but he hasn't been charged in that case. John Weeks, Robert Allen, and Shannon Verhaeghe have never been found. Marvin Gabriel is currently on death row. Foul play is suspected in all the disappearances due to the circumstances involved, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Brittany Ann Beers was born on August 1st, 1991 and lived in Sturgis, Michigan with her mother Tina Stetler and her uncle James Allen Beers. On September 16, 1997, at the age of 6, she was playing outside of her family's residence at Village Manor Apartments. At 7:30 p.m., She went outside to ride her bicycle and her mother left to run errands at approximately 8:30 p.m. and saw her daughter riding her bicycle around the neighborhood at that time. Brittany's half-brother told authorities that a few minutes after their mother left, he saw his sister sitting on a bench. A witness told investigators that he saw Brittany talking to an unidentified male driving a red or brown mid-sized vehicle shortly thereafter. Brittany walked over to the witness and told him that she made a new friend. Tina returned home at approximately 9:05 p.m. and asked Brittany's brother to find her. The authorities were summoned when she could not be located. Brittany's bicycle was discovered abandoned shortly after she was last seen. Also, a bloodhound was able to track Brittany's scent to the parking lot of a nearby convenience store, frequently used by interstate truckers. But the scent stopped there. Sketches of the unidentified man seen speaking to Brittany were distributed through the area in the days following her disappearance. It is not known if the man is connected to her case. He was in his late 20s or early 30s with short dark hair and a thick mustache and was driving either a mid-sized red car or a brown Renault. Police are still looking for the man. He is not being caught a suspect, but a witness whom they would like to question. Rumors about the family started to circulate through the streets and neighbors spoke of neglect and abuse in the household. Several people noted that Brittany was often spotted playing outside on her own and once told a neighbor that her mother would lock her out of the house if she was bad. Months after Brittany's disappearance, her 13-year-old brother and 3-year-old sister were removed from the home by the court after allegations of child physical and sexual abuse and neglect. Brittany's father Raymond Beers, his brother James Beers, and Kevin Folsom, the father of one of her half-brothers, were allegedly involved in the abuse of the children. Folsom was imprisoned for molesting Brittany, but he was released in 2008. At some point after Brittany went missing, her mother had a termination petition hearing in which she volunteered to give up her parental rights. She admitted that she just didn't have the accommodation or finance to take care of her 2 remaining children. The last photograph of Brittany was taken the day before she disappeared. There was a stark change in her appearance, with all her hair having been chopped off. She had said that her Uncle James chopped her hair because he said she wasn't taking care of it. In 2015, police named Daniel Furlong as a person of interest in Brittany's abduction. He abducted, sexually assaulted, and killed 11-year-old Jodi Parak in 2007. The case was not solved until 2015 after Furlong abducted a 10-year-old girl who subsequently escaped from him. After he became a suspect in the child's abduction, he provided a DNA sample which linked him to Jodi's murder. He subsequently confessed to the murder, pled guilty, and was sentenced to life in prison. He stated he had picked Jodi at random. Daniel Furlong bears a striking resemblance to the sketch of the man seen with Brittany prior to her disappearance. His known crimes were like Brittany's disappearance, and Jodi closely resembled her. He has maintained his innocence in her case, but remains one of the few persons of interest, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Kelly Marie Brownlee was 17 years old in 1982. She was staying with her boyfriend Mark Graves and his family in their apartment in Walled Lake, Michigan. She had moved out of her family's home in West Bloomfield, Michigan after telling friends that her stepfather, Paul Brownlee, abused her. Her friends stated that they had seen bruises on Kelly's body before she vanished. On May 20th, 1982, she and her boyfriend Mark Graves took the bus together to their high school. Kelly skipped her classes that day and hitchhiked to the 12 Oaks Mall in Novi, Michigan, where she applied for jobs at several stores. Kelly was seen around 11 a.m. by a friend's mother who offered her a ride, but she declined and said she wanted to place more applications before going home. It's unclear if she was returning to the Graves or the Brownlees' residence, but she had listed the Brownlee address on all of her applications. This was the last confirmed sighting of Kelly. 4 years before Kelly's disappearance in 1997, her stepfather Paul Brownlee had pled guilty to 4th-degree criminal sexual misconduct when Kelly's older sister Kim filed charges against him. Kim then moved to California, where the girl's biological father resided. Kelly remained in Michigan, where she had a good relationship with their mother Loretta. Kelly had occasionally moved out of the family's home due to problems with Paul. Loretta stated that Kelly was planning to move back to West Bloomfield once Paul left the residence. However, Loretta did not divorce Paul until 1985, 3 years after Kelly disappeared. But there were apparently ongoing discussions about the plan at the time. Her boyfriend Mark Graves reported Kelly missing when she did not return to either residence or call him by 9 p.m. A search was initiated soon after, but little evidence was located. Graves was ruled out as a suspect early in the investigation. Speculation began to center around the stepfather Paul Brownlee, who claimed that he was visiting his father-in-law's grave and going to the gym on the day Kelly disappeared. Paul also claimed he had not been abusive to Kelly and even placed a $1,000 reward for anyone who had information regarding her disappearance. Authorities had no evidence that Paul did anything to Kelly other than possibly abuse her. He keeps insisting he has nothing to do with her disappearance and even goes as far as handing over what he calls leads in the case to authorities in West Bloomfield. Strangely, he has continued to refuse any kind of an official interview by police even though he claims he's innocent. In 1991, he brought a Jacobson's catalog to detectives, showing them a photo of a girl modeling a bathing suit. He told them he thought it was Kelly and gave the detectives the number to the advertising people at Jacobson's. However, the girl in the picture was around 12 years old and Kelly would have been 26. In July 1982, Paul would finally agree to a police interview, but it would get them nowhere, and he would once again state his innocence. He retained an attorney and refused to submit to a polygraph test the same month. Having little evidence to implicate Paul, other than rumors of abuse towards Kelly, investigators began to look elsewhere for clues. They suspected that counterfeiting operator James Mitchell DeBartolabin may have had a connection to Kelly's case. DeBartolabin's residence was searched by United States Secret Service agents in November 1983 in Northern Virginia. Investigators would find numerous journals, audio tapes, and photos of various women being forced to do acts against their will. He was suspected of attacking and murdering many women as well as conducting his counterfeiting ring. He also apparently had a thing for brunette female hitchhikers. Kelly was a brunette and often used hitchhiking as a method of transportation. Photos were given to Loretta for purposes of attempting to identify Kelly, but there was not a connection. DeBartolabin has since been ruled out as a suspect in Kelly's case. He did not cooperate with authorities in their investigation of another young brunette's disappearance, Judith Chartier from Massachusetts, and remains a suspect in that case. Surprisingly, in 2018, authorities announced that Arthur Nelson Ream was a possible suspect in Kelly's case, and in the disappearances of Cynthia Kuhn, Kimberly King, Kim Laro, and Nadine Odell. He was convicted of sexual assault in the 1970s, and in 1986 he murdered Cindy Zarzicki, a 13-year-old girl who was dating his son. He confessed to the murder of Cindy in 2008 and led authorities to her body, which was buried in a shallow grave 30 miles from Detroit, Michigan. While in prison, Ream reportedly told cellmates he was a serial killer with 4 to 6 victims. In May 2018, police began digging at the same property where Cindy had been buried, expecting to find the bodies of other missing girls there. However, after a week, no human remains were located and the digging stopped. Another search was conducted in 2019 as police believed their bodies would be found somewhere on the north side of the Clinton River, south of 23 Mile Road and North Avenue, but nothing was found there either. As of today, Kelly Brownlee has never been found and her case remains unsolved. Mindy Arnett gave birth to her daughter, Jersey Arnett, on January 31, 2002. 5 weeks later, according to a neglect case filed with the Ingham County Circuit Court, Child Protective Services received an anonymous complaint that Mindy was mentally unstable, abused drugs, and neglected her daughter. Court records show that Mindy once said she wished she never gave birth to Jersey. In March, she threatened her and her baby's life. The next day, Mindy was taken to Washtenaw County Community Mental Health and temporarily lost custody of Jersey. Mindy's sister in Flint, Michigan received temporary custody of the baby. Mindy was living with her parents in Stockbridge, Michigan during this time. She was taking psychiatric medication, attending weekly parenting classes, and making progress towards regaining custody of her daughter and was visiting her frequently. But at 6:30 p.m. on August 14th, Mindy's sister and her husband left Mindy along with Jersey at their home while the couple went out to dinner. When they returned, both were missing. At 2 a.m. the next morning on August 15th, Mindy's 1992 Honda Civic Del Sol was found parked midspan on the Mackinac Bridge, about 200 feet above the Straits of Mackinac. State police behavioral scientists reviewed the woman's background and said she's the type who could have jumped. A motorist reported seeing a vehicle matching Mindy's parked in the northbound passing lane about an hour before she disappeared. A woman was out of the vehicle and was reaching inside a rear door where the infant seat was located. Mindy later drove north to the toll booth area, turned around and drove to the south end of the span, got off at an exit, briefly entered Interstate 75, then returned and again drove northbound on the bridge. Mindy's purse, her keys, a diaper bag, and a half-empty baby bottle were also in the car. With the previous threats to kill herself and her daughter, and with an attempt on her own life early in 2002, authorities believe Mindy jumped off the Mackinac Bridge with 6-month-old Jersey. An extensive search of the Straits of Mackinac turned up no signs of them, and their bodies have never been found. As of today, this case remains unsolved. DeJuan Christian Sims was born October 29, 1990. His mother, Duanna Wiggins, previously Duanna Harris, told authorities that her son disappeared while shopping with her at the Wonderland Mall in Livonia, Michigan on December 11, 1994. Duanna stated her son was walking along the corridor between the Target store and the main area of the shopping mall with her when he suddenly vanished at approximately 2:30 p.m. Investigators administered 2 polygraph tests to DeJuanna shortly after DeJuanna disappeared, and she failed both. Authorities stated that they did not believe her story and thought DeJuanna was never at the Wonderland Mall with his mother the day he disappeared. No witnesses saw him there, and he didn't show up on the tapes from the mall's 12 surveillance cameras either. Witnesses did see DeJuanna arrive at the mall alone at 3:30 p.m., an hour after she says DeJuan disappeared. In the days after he went missing, his mother said she felt like she was being treated as a suspect. Duanna has maintained her innocence and said in 1995 that she was in therapy to deal with her son's disappearance. She has never been charged in connection with DeJuan's case due to lack of evidence, and no suspects have been identified. Her mother said DeJuanna was emotionally devastated by her son's disappearance and would have never hurt her child. He had a life insurance policy taken out by his grandmother, but his grandmother said it was for DeJuan's college education and his mother didn't even know about it. DeJuan's father passed a polygraph in his son's disappearance and isn't considered a suspect, and also said he believed DeJuanna was a good mother. In the years following DeJuan's disappearance, his mother moved to Durham, North Carolina. 25 years after his disappearance in December of 2019, a man came forward claiming he believed he could be that missing child. She asked him things that only she and her son would know about DeJuan, like his birth date and some birthmarks he had as a child. The man was unable to answer her questions. Police said the man also suggested that him and DeJuanna meet each other at a police station, but she was not comfortable with that. The man gave his DNA to Livonia police to be tested, and it was not a match. Sadly, DeJuanna passed away in 2020, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Case of Ivon Baldelli, a hellish love story on a heavenly island. Sometimes the search for paradise on earth can lead one straight into a real-life hell from which escape is impossible. However, it's only fair to note that a significant factor in this journey is who accompanies you in search of this paradise. Choosing a companion should always be done with the utmost care and caution. Yet sometimes even the person who seems closest and dearest can turn into a true, merciless monster. The tale of Ivon Baldelli and Brian Brimmager began like something out of a fairy tale. Ivon thought she had found true love, for which she was ready to run to the ends of the earth. However, from the very beginning, her relationship raised concerns among Ivon's family, who disapproved of her partner. Unfortunately, the family's worries were not unfounded. This complex case started in 2011, when a happy and in love Ivon left with her beloved for a tropical island. As it turned out, she was heading straight towards her own demise. Only several years later, disfigured fragments of her body were discovered in the swamp, bagged alongside the remains of her cherished pets. Ivon's family exerted considerable effort to achieve justice, efforts that cost another family member their life. Who was Ivon Baldelli? Ivon Olivia Baldelli Mayfold was born on June 30, 1969, in a small town in the southern part of sunny California. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold, growing up alongside her older brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she shared a particularly close bond from childhood. When Ivon was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried to Lillian Faust, and the grown children developed wonderful relationships with their stepmother, a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Ivon received a solid education and explored several career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She was married twice, but both marriages ended in separation. Additionally, a surgery she underwent in her youth, followed by complications, left Ivon unable to have children. After divorcing her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in 2007, Ivon lived alone in her small apartment with her beloved dog, whom she affectionately called her child. She remained in constant contact with her father and sister, calling them almost daily, and making an effort to see her family at least once a month. Meeting Brian and the love triangle. In 2009, as Ivon was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimmager. At that time, he was legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open to having an affair and shared with his mistress how unhappy he was in his marriage, claiming he had unfiled for divorce solely because of his child, whom he didn't want to distress. Baldelli fell for this fit and handsome man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself and knowing how hard it can be to leave such a relationship, she didn't rush her partner, believing that the presence of a child was indeed the main obstacle. However, Brian wasn't as straightforward and sincere as he appeared. From a young age, his attractive looks had made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was accustomed to juggling multiple relationships simultaneously and expertly deceived the women who fell for him, promising each one marriage, a family, and eternal love. It soon came to light that the married Brimmager was not only seeing Ivon, but also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a stunning blonde with extensive connections. She was an analyst at the White House and had made a remarkable career during George W. Bush Jr. administration. When Ivon discovered the existence of another rival, she decided to confront the issue head-on and was ready to fight for the man she loved. Gathering her courage, she called her lover's wife to inform her that Brian was cheating on her with not just one, but two women. This revelation sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult choice. Eventually, he chose Ivon, though it's possible she pressured him into making this decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with his new love interest. At that time, he was still serving in the Marines, but had been contemplating ending his military career for a while. The couple seemed genuinely happy, but Ivon's relatives remained wary of her new partner, doubting the sincerity of his feelings. Moving to a tropical paradise. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to talk about radically changing his life, leaving the service, moving away from the bustling city, and settling down on the tropical island. Ivon shared his sentiments, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever and whenever he decided. She believed she had met the most important man in her life and adored him. By September of the same year, the decision was final. The couple chose to move to Panama and settle on the small island of Coronero, a place that could truly be called a paradise. Ivon informed her family just before leaving, so they had no chance to persuade her to reconsider. Ivon sold her apartment, quit her job, and started packing for the journey. She took only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, hoping to fulfill her dream of opening a small boutique to create and sell custom outfits to tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Ivon, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a couple of days in the country's capital before taking a ferry to Coronero Island, where they rented a house right on the ocean front. The climate was hot and humid with little temperature variation, attracting a steady flow of tourists throughout the year, primarily diving and surfing enthusiasts. The island was just 1 square kilometer, so one could leisurely walk around it in about an hour. All the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior was dense jungle and swampy areas teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it unsafe to venture into. Brian, who had been an excellent guitar player since his youth, brought his instrument with the intention of starting a musical career on the island, performing in entertainment venues. Within a week after moving, he had made connections with several local bar owners, and one of them happily offered him a job. He played in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his appreciative audience often bought him drinks as a compliment, leading him to drink heavily almost daily. Ivon's business also developed very slowly with weak sales and virtually no profit. However, she didn't lose heart. She started working at one of the bars and even adopted a second dog she found on the island and decided to keep. She communicated with her sister, Michelle Valenzuela, almost daily, sharing everything. But her messages became increasingly shorter and more somber, which worried her family. The first few months on the island seemed like paradise to the couple. Ivon hoped that Brian would propose and they would have a romantic wedding ceremony on the ocean shore. But time passed. Brian didn't rush into marriage, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. The mysterious disappearance. In early December, stopped receiving messages from Ivon, which raised her concern significantly. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle, inquiring when he could stop by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her garage before heading to Panama. This call and question caught Michelle off guard. It meant Brian had returned to the US and wanted to retrieve his vehicle. But where was Ivon? Why hadn't she come back or even called? In response, Brian claimed he had explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also mentioned that his now ex-girlfriend had supposedly sent her a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing, so she turned to her email. Indeed, there were 2 unread messages, one from her sister and one from her boyfriend. In his message, Brian stated that Ivon had left him, running off with a new lover to Costa Rica. The other message, supposedly from Ivon, claimed she had left Brian upon discovering his infidelity and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. It concluded with her saying she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine Verhoeven, with whom he had been involved all along, and who was pregnant with his child when he and Ivon flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed plausible and logical, especially since Ivon couldn't have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else could have been devastating for her. However, Ivon wasn't known for impulsive actions, and she would have certainly called her sister to discuss such significant changes in her life. Moreover, the tone of the supposed message from Ivon was somewhat odd and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle tried to determine her sister's current whereabouts, she couldn't get any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and the messages that came through were brief and detached, saying things like, "I'm okay. I need some time. I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian should join her in filing a missing persons report. Brian appeared nervous but insisted it wasn't necessary, claiming Ivon was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to come home on her own. Despite Brian's reluctance even to discuss the matter and his hasty departure after picking up his vehicle, a message from Ivon's phone soon arrived, stating she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message provided Michelle with some relief, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping Ivon would return as indicated in the message. Search efforts and surprising discoveries. By mid-January, not only had Ivon not returned home, but she also hadn't called even once during that time, and her messages had completely stopped. Moreover, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had gotten married to the mother of his child, Christine Verhoeven, right before the new year, which seemed very odd since he had parted ways with his former girlfriend just a few weeks before the celebration. Concerned, Michelle finally went to the police and reported her sister missing, suspecting that Ivon had not gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry sent to Panama confirmed her fears. It was definitively established that Ivon Baldelli had not left the country. Valenzuela then turned to her cousin, a programmer, to help trace the IP address from which Ivon's messages were sent, determining their actual origin. It turned out the emails, supposedly sent by Ivon from Costa Rica in December, were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. With the situation becoming increasingly alarming, Michelle hurriedly informed the police about her discovery. Valenzuela reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and then continued to send messages from her phone and email, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue gathering proof of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Ivon. He promised Verhoeven that he would soon return. They would get married and raise their daughter together. Moreover, Christine was unaware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's own investigation. 2 months after the woman's disappearance, her sister and niece personally flew to Panama. There, they sought the expertise of Don Winner, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator, specializing in locating missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Ivon's disappearance and the version of events provided by Brian. Winner, after listening to them, immediately expressed concern that the chances of Ivon being alive were slim. With vast experience in such investigations and leveraging his connections, Winner decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was also organized with the participation of Ivon's family members. Later, Ivon's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends arrived in Panama to join the search and assist the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Caramaro, combing it thoroughly, yet they found no trace of Baldelli. Their search efforts were hampered by dense undergrowth and swampy marshes teeming with wildlife. In addition, the family questioned the island's residents about how well they knew Brian and Ivon and what they could say about them. It turned out that the couple had recently been heavily indulging in alcoholic beverages and were frequently involved in loud disputes, unconcerned about those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars drinking alcohol and having heated arguments. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Ivon's face and body. She almost never took off her sunglasses, seemingly to hide the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house the couple had rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residence. Simultaneously, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to scour the waters around it for any potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches did not yield any success. The prime suspect and the first solid evidence. From the outset, Ryan was the prime suspect in the case, but there was nothing concrete to charge him with. He denied any involvement, consistently outing the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It wasn't until September 21, 2012, that Brimmager was finally interrogated, and a search was conducted in his home. At the time, his wife Christine was at work, while Brian was unemployed, staying at home with their child and indulging in his favorite pastime, playing golf. Initially, he appeared confident, repeating that Ivon had left him after finding out about his child with another woman. However, he became visibly nervous when the police mentioned that the last messages sent in Ivon's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his table. The seized laptop turned out to belong to Ivon, with messages sent from it after she supposedly fled. A photo of the missing woman with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November, where Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and shared daughter, presumably how Baldelli learned about them. Moreover, the laptop's search history from November 26, 2011, contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant, but circumstantial, since neither a body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Ivon didn't definitively prove him guilty. Soon, Don Winner discovered that before leaving Panama, Brimmager had sold a machete he owned. In an online conversation with a potential buyer, he joked that he had used the weapon just once to finish off a stripper. The joke was macabre, prompting authorities to track down the new owner of the machete and seize the blade for examination, which initially revealed nothing conclusive. The long-awaited arrest. The police overlooked another crucial detail, Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance. To add credibility to his story, before returning to the States, he decided to make a trip to Costa Rica and use the missing woman's card a couple of times, creating the illusion that she had indeed fled to that country. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, draining the card before discarding it. However, Brimmager failed to consider that he was captured on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. It wasn't until July 2013, a year and a half after the woman's disappearance, that her relatives, armed with all the evidence gathered by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winner, finally managed to secure Brian's arrest. Initially, he was detained on charges of making false statements and obstructing the investigation, as there was nothing more substantial to charge him with at that time. By then, he had become a father for the second time. Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to engage the suspect in a candid conversation, offering him a chance to confess to the crime and disclose the location of the body, but Brian consistently denied any wrongdoing. His lawyer also insisted on the absence of a body or direct evidence proving Ivon's demise and Brian's involvement in it. The gruesome discovery in the swamp. Just 2 months after Brimmager's arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. On the island of Carnero, a worker taking a shortcut wandered into the swampy underbrush and spotted an army backpack barely visible above the waters, driven by curiosity and hoping to find something valuable or useful inside. He looked in the bag, only to recoil in horror at the sight of a human skull staring back at him. He immediately reported his find to the police, and responding officers took the backpack for examination. Inside were fragments of a human body along with the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been chopped up, placed in the bag, and discarded in a location where it was assumed they would never be found. DNA testing confirmed that the human remains belonged to Ivon, although limbs were missing. Mythologists also determined that she had been brutally beaten before her demise, with a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The demise of the dogs was probably orchestrated to lend credence to the narrative, as it seemed implausible that she would willingly leave behind her cherished pets on the island, suggesting a scenario where they were eliminated and laid to rest alongside their owner. When the chop marks found on the victim's bones were matched with the blade of the machete, there was no doubt. The body had been dismembered using this weapon, as each blade has its own signature, akin to a person's fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. The trial and verdict. In early 2014, Michelle Valenzuela was diagnosed with an advanced stage of aggressive cancer. She had been so consumed by the investigation into her sister's case that she neglected her deteriorating health, postponing visits to the doctor. After undergoing intensive treatment for about 6 months and realizing it was in vain, she decided to dedicate the last months of her life to seeking justice for her sister. In September 2014, when doctors told Michelle she had only a few weeks left, she declared that although she was losing her battle with the disease, she would continue to fight for her sister until her last breath. Choosing to make her testimony in front of Brian, she detailed everything she knew and submitted all their correspondence with Ivon to the court. She meticulously described Brian's actions after her sister's disappearance and then fainted from weakness. Michelle passed away 3 days later. The prosecution argued that on the evening of November 26th, following another argument with Ivon, when she discovered Brian's communications with Christine, Brian, in a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, assaulted Ivon and then fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using the machete, also using it to take the live Yvonne's beloved dogs, and placed the remains in his military backpack. The limbs that didn't fit in the bag were dumped in the ocean, dropped off a rocky cliff early in the morning along with the blood-stained mattress. Brian carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the next few weeks, he continued living in the same coastal house, meticulously erasing any evidence of the crime. He told everyone on the island a story about his flighty girlfriend leaving him for a new lover, a story that sounded convincing enough that locals sympathized with Brian. And he even managed to find a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until his departure to the U.S. However, at the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of lying and cruelty. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Brian was forced to admit his guilt, but insisted that it was self-defense, claiming Ivon had first attacked him with a knife, which he then used against her. He claimed all subsequent actions were carried out in the state of shock, asserting he didn't remember dismembering and packing the body, taking the lives of the dogs, and so forth. However, his internet searches and attempts to eliminate evidence spoke to his full awareness and attempts to fabricate a story to justify Ivon's absence. In the spring of 2016, Brian was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to only 26 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 2035. His service in the Marines was considered during sentencing, allowing him to avoid a life sentence. Lastly, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, stated she still believed in her husband's innocence and would support him no matter what. On October 22, 1997, Levi Freddy arrived home from school on the school bus around 3:30 p.m. He then called his mother, Marilyn, at work and told her he was going to a friend's house. His mother told him to be back home by 6:30 p.m. Levi got on his red bicycle with his backpack on and started the less than a mile journey to his friend's house. Once he was there, he and his friend rode their bikes over to another boy's home where they jumped on the trampoline. But they had to leave because the boy was going to dinner with his family. And so Levi and his friend rode over to another boy's home and Levi went in to use their phone. Levi called home at 6:38 p.m. His mother was in the bathtub and so his twin sister Lacey answered the phone. It had already gotten dark outside and Levi was scared to come home. But his sister told him his mother wanted him straight home. So Levi did as he was told. He would leave his friend's house about 6:45 p.m., but he decided to take a different path home. Levi was scared of some dogs on his normal route on Pickle Slime Road and decided to go down Little Mill Road to avoid them. Little Mill Road is a well-traveled road between Highway 306 and 369 around 6:50 p.m. A resident in the area reported seeing him pedaling away with a small black dog following close behind him. A few minutes later, a woman drove past a man between 35 and 60 years old with grayish-black or brown hair that appeared scraggly and unkempt. The woman was lost and attempted to ask the man for directions. Strangely, the man did not respond to her and quickly walked off into the woods. By 7 p.m., his mother got very worried and called the friend's house to find out what happened to Levi, but they never answered. Marilyn and Lacey then left home in search of Levi. They returned home and continued making phone calls to Levi's friends, searching for answers. At 2 a.m. the next morning, his mom once again left to go search for Levi. Around 7 a.m., his bicycle was seen by residents heading to work, but they did not think much of it. During this time, Levi's grandfather and other relatives were out looking for him as well. They found his bicycle in a ditch and brought it back to his house. At this point, around 8 a.m., his mother reported him missing to Forsyth County Sheriff's Office. Law enforcement would begin their search around the Little Mill Road area where Levi was last seen but turned up nothing. Sadly, 6 hours after Levi was reported missing, his body was found by hunters partially submerged in a water-filled ditch in the Dawson Forest Game Management Area in Dawson County, over 20 miles from where he was last seen. An autopsy revealed that Levi had been shot 3 times. Residents helped the police draw up composite sketches of 2 possible witnesses. One sketch was of the man walking along Little Mill Road. The second sketch was from the hunter from Dawson Forest. That was interviewed that night and gave a description of a man dressed in a dress shirt and a tire, which seemed out of place in Dawson Forest. He also gave a description of a small blue Toyota truck with a white camper shell seen in the area close to the crime scene around 10 a.m. that morning. The case has gone cold over the years, but investigators with the GBI say leads keep coming in and they have received a number of tips. Investigators say there was no sexual assault, no robbery, and no apparent motive other than the suspect may have had intentions of a sexual assault, but was unable to for whatever reason. The only thing good to come out of this case was the creation of Levi's call for missing children, Georgia's version of the Amber Alert in honor of Levi Freddy. It was designed to inform the public quickly when a confirmed abduction has occurred. No suspects have ever been arrested in Levi's case, and as of today, it remains unsolved. Hannah Truelove was found deceased on August 24, 2012, when she was only 16 years old. When her mother, Mona Harris, returned home from work on August 23, 2012, she noticed her daughter was not there. Mona saw mail tossed on the couch, which meant Hannah was home at some point. They lived in apartments that were gated on Dawsonville Highway in Gainesville, Georgia. She didn't think much of this and decided to take a nap. When she awoke a while later, her daughter still wasn't home and panic began to ensue. She then called her ex-husband and Hannah's father, Jeff Truelove, and asked if she was with him. Jeff informed her she wasn't, and so Mona started to call Hannah's friends, but they hadn't seen her either. She would then contact the Hall County Police Department and report her daughter missing. Hannah was last seen with friends in the common area of the Lake Lanier Club apartments around 7:30 p.m. on the 23rd, where she and her mother lived. Law enforcement would begin searching the area around the apartments, but a major storm was on its way, forcing them to end the search early. The storm would drop 3 inches of rain that night. The next day, on August 24, 2012, a man walking his dog would find her body behind the Lake Lanier Club apartments in a heavily wooded area about a quarter mile from her apartment. Due to the rain, the night Hannah disappeared, her body had been submerged in water for a period of time, and so a lot of trace evidence and blood evidence were washed away. The results from the autopsy were withheld from the public, but they did state that she had been stabbed multiple times. A witness told investigators that the night of Hannah's disappearance, a silver car with 3 unidentified male teens had pulled into the apartment complex. A male subject exited the vehicle and walked around a tree line out of sight of the witness. When the male subject returned about 10 minutes later, Hannah was seen walking about 10 to 15 steps behind the teen. The witness saw them walk across the parking lot and behind a building near the area where she was found dead. While that teen remains a person of interest, witnesses saw her alive after that, so it is very unlikely she was murdered at that time. Another silver car was seen in the area with a man in it, and the GBI put out a statement that they were looking for a 1990s to early 2000s 4-door Chevrolet or Dodge, possibly light silver in color with front-end damage. As of today, this person has never been identified. Her father would tell the police that a fellow student at Hannah's school had been harassing her, and she was scared to ride the school bus. Her father believes the student may have threatened her in the past. Some people believe her Twitter account might have held some possible clues, because on August 12, 2012, she tweeted, "I got me an ugly-ass stalker." And on August 18th, she tweeted, "So scared right now." And on August 19th, she tweeted, "Every time we talk, I feel sick." It is not clear who the tweets were directed at, but investigators feel it was just Hannah venting on Twitter and there was never a legitimate threat. Even though investigators had many possible leads to start, the case is run cold and as of today remains unsolved. On May 17, 1990, 18-year-old Ronda Sue Coleman was 2 weeks away from graduating Jeff Davis High School in Hazelhurst, Georgia. That night, part of the graduating class gathered to decorate a graduation banner to put up at school. After the banner decorating party, Ronda and a few other students went to a nearby convenience store. Ronda's friends would later tell police that a little after 10 p.m., Ronda said she had to leave to get home to her 10:30 p.m. curfew. She said she was going to go through the nearby Hardee's drive-thru, then make the 3-mile drive home. That same night, one of Ronda's classmates, Layla Marshall, couldn't make it to the banner decorating festivities because of her work schedule. When she got off work, she stopped at her boyfriend's house before driving home. Ronda lived only 2 miles from Layla's house. Around 10:30 p.m. on her drive from her boyfriend's house to her own, she passed a car that was pulled over on a dirt road with its lights on. She quickly realized that the car belonged to Ronda, and so she turned around to see if she was okay. When Layla got out of her car, she saw that Ronda's car was still running, the lights were on, and that the driver's door was open. However, Ronda was nowhere to be found. Layla turned off the engine and went back to her boyfriend's house to call police. She stated she and her boyfriend returned to the car to wait for the police. Meanwhile, Ronda's parents, Milton and Gail Coleman, were worried about their daughter, who is now late for her curfew. Ronda's dad, Milton, said his daughter was almost never late coming home, and if she was, she would always call ahead of time. Around 11 p.m., Milton decided to drive around to see if he could find Ronda. After waiting for about 30 minutes at Ronda's car with no sign of the police, Layla and her boyfriend went back to the boyfriend's house to call again and then returned to Ronda's car. Police arrived at Ronda's car around 11:40 p.m. over an hour later. While out driving to look for Ronda, her father Milton came across the police at the scene of Ronda's car. Police found Ronda's purse inside her car and found footprints leading from her car towards the tire tracks of another vehicle. The tire marks indicated that another vehicle, other than Layla's, had pulled over on the side of the road that night. 3 days later, on May 20th, 1990, Ronda's body was found by a hunter about 15 miles from where her car had been found. It was in a rural, wooded area in Montgomery County, Georgia, off a country road. Ronda's body was fully clothed and she had been burned. Investigators explained Ronda's cause of death is undetermined because of the state of her body, which made it difficult to find her exact cause of death. Said that everyone who saw Ronda on her last night alive is a person of interest, but no arrests have been made in the case. Ronda was planning to attend Georgia Southern University to become a pediatric nurse. Her parents received her honorary diploma at Jeff Davis High School just 2 weeks after she was found. As of today, this case remains unsolved. Timothy James Guy was born August 8, 1968, and was nicknamed Tim. He moved to Forsyth County, Georgia from his family's home in Snellville, Georgia shortly before he disappeared in February 1987 at the age of 18. Tim is described as a naive person with a mild learning disability. He worked as a stable hand and also lived at the Sleepy Fox Farm, a horse ranch in Forsyth County, about 25 miles from his family's home. The farm has since been demolished and built over with a residential establishment. His fellow workers last saw Tim at approximately 9:30 p.m. on February 6th as he was preparing to return to his parents' home in Snailville for the weekend. According to the head foreman at the farm, Philip Klinger, he was accompanied by an unidentified white male known only as Jeff. Philip said Jeff and Tim entered the vehicle and drove away and they were never seen again. Philip is described as a tyrant. He has an extensive criminal history but has since passed away. Tim's family stated that he never arrived in Snailville the previous weekend and filed a missing persons report with authorities. It is strongly believed that Jeff never existed and that Philip made up the story. Not long after Tim disappeared, a man named Tom stated he had found out that Tim was killed and his body put in a tree shredder and his remains were dumped into the Chattahoochee River. Many people believe that Philip murdered Tim and made up the story about the man named Jeff. Philip's daughter Dawn has sent many Facebook messages bragging about her father killing him. She has made several statements that Tim will never be found. It is reported that the farm was a cover-up for drug activity and that Tim may have witnessed illegal activity on the farm and was murdered as a result. Tim's father was watching the farm after he disappeared and witnessed Philip walking away from 2 rock crushers located a half a mile from the farm. His family just wants his body so they can lay him to rest, but sadly as of today, this case remains unsolved. Joshua Scott Adams was born on August 8, 1987. He was athletic and enjoyed fishing and riding four-wheelers and lived in Jackson County, Georgia. He worked with his father and brother with the family business. On May 20, 2013, 25-year-old Joshua left home in his white 2009 Chevrolet Malibu. And later that day, he cashed a check for $400 that he had stolen from his parents. Hours later, His car was found abandoned in a pasture next to a pond where he often fished on his family's land on Brockton Loop Road. His cell phone, wallet, ID, and $25 in cash were inside the car along with the keys. The next day, his shoes were found on the banks of the pond a few hundred yards from where the car had been found. Police searched the area with cadaver dogs and even drained the lake but found no other evidence. His cell phone records show that he called the same man 5 times on the day of his disappearance. However, the man denied having spoken to him and refused to cooperate with the investigation. Another man admitted to speaking to Josh at 9 a.m., but he would not say what their conversation was about. 2 weeks before he went missing, Joshua completed a 6-week drug rehabilitation program in Battle Creek, Michigan. His family stated he had no history of leaving home without warning, and they think he may have started using drugs again prior to his disappearance. Investigators have interviewed numerous people about Joshua's case. Sadly, not long after Joshua's disappearance, his mother passed away, and Joshua's sister Shannon says that a broken heart led to that. There have been many rumors circulating this case and is being investigated as a homicide, but as of today, this case remains unsolved. On May 2, 2009 in Wausau, Wisconsin, USA, a terrible crime took place. An 18-year-old girl named Brianna Marie Schneller was the victim. For the small town, such an event was shocking, particularly since the girl's death was the result of actions executed with unimaginable cruelty. However, more shocking than the crime itself was the motive behind it. Brianna had a vibrant personality, loved Mexican cuisine, music, and dancing, and she was fond of roller coasters. She was very diligent and performed well academically. She was the top student at Everest High School in Washington, said Craig and Lori Schneller, her parents. She had a trip planned to Tennessee that summer. The young lady was the only one in the state of Wisconsin who had made it through the qualifying rounds of a competition held by a renowned national nonprofit organization for students in professional and technical fields where she was to present her project. Brianna aspired to pursue higher education in restaurant management and dreamed of someday starting her own business in the food service industry. Therefore, she worked part-time at the El Moscow restaurant in Rib Mountain to earn money and gain the necessary experience and skills. Friends, colleagues, and even patrons described her as a kind and responsive person. She was just a month away from significant milestones in her life. She was about to graduate from school and marry her beloved 22-year-old Sebastian Ramirez. Initially, her parents objected to their relationship and the age difference. In their view, their daughter had matured too quickly. However, after getting to know the young man better, they trusted him. It was evident that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious intentions regarding their future together. The couple moved in together, renting an apartment on 12th Avenue in Wausau along with Sebastian's 19-year-old brother, Hugo. Outwardly, it seemed that the trio got along well and lived peacefully. Many envied their friendship. The brothers supported Brianna's interests, as they also worked at a restaurant called El Tequila Salsa in the same area. It is possible that one work day was when Sebastian and Brianna met each other. In any case, no one expected that a horrific tragedy could disrupt the plans and dreams of the two lovers. The morning of May 2, 2009 began as usual. Sebastian was the first to rise in the house. He didn't want to wake the girl sweetly sleeping beside him. It was a day off and she didn't need to rush to school. While the young man was in the shower, Brianna woke up. They exchanged sweet greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to wake up Hugo, who had come home in the early morning and had clearly overdone it at a party the night before. After that, Sebastian left for work, which was only a 5-10-minute walk away. His younger brother followed soon after. The girl stayed home alone. She exchanged messages with her mother and then got on with her tasks. That day, Hugo felt restless. He had a headache from too much drinking and regretted overindulging. Struggling to focus, he decided to swap lunch breaks with a colleague, and at 1:20 p.m., he headed home to catch some sleep. When he entered the apartment, nothing seemed unusual at first. However, as he walked further, he noticed a disorder in his brother's and his girlfriend's room. For some reason, Brianna was lying on the floor. Hugo rushed to her and asked what happened, but she did not respond. He didn't immediately notice the blood. The young man moved the towel that had been covering her face and screamed. She was unrecognizably disfigured. He grabbed the phone to call the emergency services, but his hands were shaking and his mind was foggy. Nevertheless, he knew he had to act, and he ran to his neighbor's apartment, a floor below. Through tears, young Ramirez tried to explain what had happened and asked the woman to call for help. At 1:30 p.m., the emergency services received a call. Despite it being a Saturday, the day was far from peaceful. Unfortunately, incidents often occur on days when people are supposed to relax. The woman on the other end of the line reported that she was calling on behalf of a neighbor. He had asked her to summon emergency medical services for his brother's girlfriend. The unfortunate woman lay on the floor with cuts on her body and a disfigured face showing no signs of life. Police and paramedics were dispatched to the address immediately. The parking lot of the apartment building was crowded, but one individual stood out from the crowd and approached them. It was Hugo Ramirez. He led the officers to the apartment. The young man could barely speak, so he simply pointed out the shocking scene. At the center of it all lay Brianna, her body bearing deep wounds. Stab wounds were evident on her chest, neck, and wrist. The officers asked the young man to leave the room while forensic specialists began their examination. One speculated that the victim had been lying there for some time, as the blood scattered everywhere had already started to dry. It was clear she had fought back, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the assailant had overpowered her. The crime scene was rife with evidence. The first thing the forensic team noticed was a bloody iron lying on the floor, broken with some pieces scattered nearby. It appeared that the criminal had used it to strike her face. 2 knives lay in the bathroom sink, one missing its sharp tip. Blood was found on the soap, leading investigators to speculate that the criminal had used it to wash their hands. But the bloodied shoe print left on the carpet drew more attention. Overall, the examination of the dwelling revealed several curious details. There appeared to be no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim knew the wrongdoer or that he had some way of gaining entry to the apartment. Another notable detail was the scattered bills ranging from $1 to $20, amounting to a substantial sum. Hugo explained that these were tips they had accumulated at work, so much so that they were just placed anywhere. At first glance, nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment. Everything pointed to the fact that Brianna was the target of the attack, not robbery. This was confirmed by the broken knife tip found in her body. What kind of force was necessary to break a knife? Who could harbor such feelings towards a young woman? And most importantly, what could have been the cause of such unprecedented cruelty and aggression? Eager to shed light on the matter, law enforcement officers were keen to speak with the girl's relatives and close friends, especially as they needed to convey the dreadful news. In the police department's office, Craig and Lori Schneller awaited news. They had heard that something terrible had occurred at the home where their daughter lived, but unfortunately, they had been unable to contact her. With heavy hearts, they went to the police station seeking answers. The officers had to confirm the parents' worst fears were indeed true. There was no greater sorrow for parents than to endure the loss of a child. The devastating news split the Schneller's life into before and after. Authorities provided photographs of Brianna for identification. The process was a mere formality, as her identity was already established, but protocol required it. Due to the horrific injuries, not all photographs taken at the scene were shown to the family. Only those that showed part of her face were displayed. Once confirmed, the Schnellers could hardly believe what had happened. After consulting with a psychologist, Craig and Lori were able to answer a series of questions. They were eager to assist the investigation and catch the person responsible, so they provided as much information about their daughter's life as possible. The parents insisted that she had no known enemies or ill-wishers, at least to their knowledge. It was also revealed that Brianna's mother was the last person she had communicated with. That morning, Lori had taken Brianna's car to the auto repair shop and had messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to inform her. Brianna had responded. This means that the tragic incident occurred after she spoke with her mother and before Hugo's arrival, establishing a timeline for the events. The police launched a comprehensive investigation. The first to be invited for an interview by the detectives were the Rodriguez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, who were questioned separately. The fiancé of the victim, Sebastian, reported that he woke up at 9:15 in the morning, had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke his brother. By 10:15, he was already at the restaurant. He learned about the incident after receiving a phone call. Hugo's account matched, stating he left the house about 10-15 minutes after Sebastian. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. because he was feeling unwell and wanted to rest. However, his illness and fatigue vanished when he discovered Brianna lifeless. After that, everything seemed like a blur. He explained that he was so stunned that he couldn't think straight on how to react properly. His mind shut down and his hands trembled, leaving him to run to a neighbor and ask for help. The Ramirez brothers were credible and their distress appeared genuine. However, the police had often encountered convincing performances before, so they needed solid proof of their innocence. It was entirely possible that one of them was the perpetrator, and the other was covering for him. Therefore, detectives inquired about their relationships with each other. Sebastian declared his love for Brianna and his anticipation for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was asked if he had any grievances against his brother's girlfriend or if they had quarreled, to which he responded negatively. He also clarified that despite her attractiveness and charm, he had no intentions toward her because he valued their good relationship and would never interfere with Sebastian's happiness. Brianna was like a sister to him. The interrogations lasted for hours, yet neither brother aroused any suspicion. After taking DNA samples from the young men, they were allowed to return home. To confirm or refute the Ramirez brothers' alibis, detectives interviewed employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the establishment's surveillance footage. Sebastian and Hugo's accounts were corroborated. The theory of a domestic-related crime was dismissed. Then who was the murderer of this innocent young woman? Could there be a predator in the city? Perhaps he had been watching Brianna earlier and had learned much about her. Maybe on a day when she was alone, he executed his criminal intent. The investigation continued. By this point, the autopsy results had come in, confirming the initial suspicions of the police. The sequence of the crime was reconstructed as follows. Brianna first sustained a blunt force injury to the head, likely with an iron. Then the perpetrator cut her throat, followed by multiple stab wounds to her body. The ferocity and relentlessness of the attack were evidenced by the number of wounds, which were so numerous that even experts couldn't tally them. At least 2 of these injuries were immediately fatal. The young woman fought fiercely for her life, as indicated by the foreign DNA found under her nails. Later developments revealed that earlier statements claiming nothing was missing from the home were incorrect. The victim's phone had disappeared. Sebastian discovered the loss and promptly informed the detectives. This piece of information became a critical lead, as once the police received this new clue, they began searching for the mobile device. Rihanna's cell phone provider reported that her phone was still active and provided its location. It turned out that the phone had been nearby all along, specifically within the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. The investigation grew more complex with the brothers' undeniable alibi, and one of them reporting the missing phone against the backdrop of suspicious coincidences. Detectives urgently traveled to the specified location, but upon arrival, they found that the coordinates led to the parking lot of a shopping center housing the restaurant. It appeared the sought-after item was in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found inside a container. Within the bag were the girl's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves was stained with blood. This unexpected discovery shifted the narrative, as theories about a predator and a crime driven by intimate motives began to gain traction. The bag and its contents were sent to the laboratory for further examination, potentially still holding fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. When shown a photo of the contents, Sebastian recognized his girlfriend's underwear. The investigation proceeded with numerous interrogations of the restaurant staff. On May 5th, everyone was asked to provide DNA samples and undergo examinations for any scratches or injuries. Additionally, Both the external and internal surveillance footage of the building and neighboring establishments was thoroughly reviewed. The police had a considerable task ahead of them to determine who had disposed of the bag. Initially, a kitchen worker attracted attention because he was notably late for work, arriving when Brianna was already lifeless. However, the young man had a malabar. He had been stopped for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Nonetheless, reviewing the surveillance footage proved invaluable to the investigation. Another individual, the 24-year-old kitchen manager Raul Pons Rocha, became a person of interest. On the day of the crime, he left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned at 10:53 a.m. without it. During questioning, he was asked about his whereabouts and intentions. Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant. Interestingly, Luciano lived in the same building as Brianna, Sebastian, and Hugo. When asked how long his errand took, he said about 20 minutes, but there was a problem with the timeline. What happened in the remaining 15 minutes? Raul refused to explain. Meanwhile, Luciano confirmed Raul's story, saying they did not stop anywhere on their way to work. However, the 15-minute discrepancy continued to trouble the detectives, and Raul's behavior raised questions. He had cuts on his hands, which he attributed to working with knives. Raul was clearly suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence for his detention. By May 9th, it was established that on May 2nd, at 1:16 p.m., a single employee exited the back door of El Tequila Salsa, and at the same time, only one person approached the trash bins. Identifying the suspect took little time. When his name was announced, the investigative team was not surprised. It was not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez, as initially thought, but the suspect Raul Ponsaraca. When a search warrant was obtained for his home, curious details about the manager's life emerged. Under the mattress of his bed were found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos, along with a brown hoodie and a glove resembling the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag. A strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. Everything pointed to the victim, Brianna. It was just a matter of matching the test results. Raul was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder when it became known that the alleged perpetrator had been found. Sebastian couldn't believe his ears. He never thought his colleague capable of such cruelty. The main question that troubled him was, why did he do it? They hardly knew Brianna and had only seen her in passing. Raul had always seemed like a kind and cheerful guy, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. But the answer was found. The trial of Raul Pons Rocha took place in 2011. Despite the lengthy investigation, Pons Rocha never admitted guilt and consistently denied any involvement in the crime. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence. The defendant's DNA was found on all key pieces of evidence: the iron, the knives, the plastic bag and its contents, and under Brianna's fingernails. Additionally, a shoe print found on the carpet at the crime scene matched the size and pattern of the suspect's shoes. The investigation painted a clear picture of the events. On May 2, 2009, Raul arrived at work at 9 a.m. en route to the restaurant. He passed the victim's house, a place that had long piqued his interest. Not seeing her car, he assumed she was out and saw it as an opportune moment to enter her apartment and take what he desired. The accused had a peculiar habit of collecting women's underwear, the evidence of which was found under his mattress. After the Rodriguez brothers arrived at work, Raul left the restaurant under the guise of picking up Luciano. Instead of signaling his friend immediately upon arrival, he entered the victim's apartment. He easily unlocked the door and entered. It appears he went into Brianna's room and began rummaging through her belongings. He was likely caught off guard at that moment. Otherwise, he could have excused his unexpected presence by claiming he was looking for one of the brothers and that the door had been opened. Realizing the absurdity of the situation and fearing recognition, he struck her with the first object he could find, an iron. He then slashed her throat with a knife, followed by inflicting multiple injuries. The investigation concluded that the process of taking her life seemed to gratify him, as evidenced by the excessive number of wounds inflicted on the poor victim. It also noted that Raul used multiple knives during the attack. Afterwards, the culprit tried to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, as he still had to meet Luciano and drive him to the restaurant. He then resumed work as if nothing had happened, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. When many staff took their lunch breaks, he seized the moment to dispose of the bag containing the evidence in a trash bin. Shortly before the trial, Raul stated that he indeed met with Brianna, but did not end her life. However, he suspected who might have done it and named a former restaurant employee. According to the defendant, he saw this acquaintance at Brianna's house on the day her life was tragically ended, thus confirming that he indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when he left, Sergio stayed with Brianna, apparently having an argument. The defendant's statement raised additional questions and investigations. The information he provided was subject to verification. Moreover, the individual he mentioned was abroad. Nonetheless, authorities managed to contact Sergio. He even appeared at the trial to testify his non-involvement and refute Raul's slander. The young man easily proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime. Weeks before, he had left to care for his gravely ill father in Mexico. Apparently, the defendant hoped that contact with Sergio would not be established, thereby sowing a seed of doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed. The defendant merely emphasized that he had no qualms about falsely accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime. It was clear that he felt no remorse for his actions. During the trial, Brianna's relatives, as well as Sebastian and Hugo, were present. The young men struggled to contain their emotions, prompting officers to repeatedly call for calm. Ultimately, Raul Ponzrocha was found guilty of the crime against Brianna Schneller, as well as burglary. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at a correctional institution in Walpoin, Wisconsin. Following the verdict, the victim's father stated that his daughter's case had become personal for many involved, as they all have families and children. He shared that he has not parted with a Father's Day card Brianna gave him, cherishing every memory of her. Greg Schneller confessed that Brianna's death broke his heart, and he lost faith. No information about Sebastian Ramirez is available. It is only to be hoped that he has closed this tragic chapter of his life with a sense of completeness and has been able to move forward. One day, his brother Hugo appeared on a television show discussing the ordeal they endured. Raul's actions were fatal for Brianna. He not only ended the life of a beautiful young woman, but also devastated the hearts of her family. Things could have been different if the young man had not chosen to cover his tracks. He might have gotten away with clumsy explanations and apologies to the girl. At most, it would have ended with a confrontation between him and the Rodriguez brothers. It is unlikely the victim would have reported him to the police. And even then, the incident could have been resolved with minimal harm. Dorene and Marfio was born July 7, 1955 as Dorene Dobson. In 1976, she met Stephen Marfio and the two married in 1978 and settled in Johnston, Rhode Island on Hartford Avenue. Dorene was the purchasing editor at the Rhode Island School of Design. In October of 1989, she abruptly quit her job saying that she wanted a change. According to Stephen, she began behaving erratically and at some point she seemed on the edge of a nervous breakdown, but she refused to tell him what the problem was. On March 29, 1990, she didn't make her usual call to her mother, and when Stephen came home, Dorene was not there. She would never show back up and he would wait 2 days before declaring her missing, and only after her mother threatened him to do it. When asked about her, he claimed that she had taken only a week's worth of clothes in a suitcase and had only $600 with her and did not take any of the $50,000 in the joint bank account. She left behind her curlers, toothbrush, pet cats, and 1984 Ford Tempo. She also left no note explaining where she may have gone. On the day of Dorene's disappearance, Stephen strangely took a 70-minute lunch break from work. His lunch breaks were usually only 20 to 30 minutes long. He claims he went home, ate lunch with Dorene and went back to work, and when he returned home at 4 p.m. that day, she was gone. At the time of her disappearance, he suspected she was having an affair and had hired 2 separate private detectives to follow her for 11 months. However, there is no evidence that Dorene was actually being unfaithful, and suspiciously, he never hired the private detectives to look for her after she disappeared. Investigators do not believe Dorene left of her own accord and believe that Stephen possibly murdered her. Her family says she was close to them and would never have left without contacting them. In June 1990, 3 months after she went missing, police received 2 letters. The first one stated that Stephen had strangled Dorene on the couch and dumped her body in a pond in Providence, Rhode Island. The second letter accused Dorene of having affairs with some of her co-workers, men which the letter identified by name. Both letters were typed on a typewriter from Stephen's mother's house, and authorities believe Stephen wrote them, although the letters referred to him in the third person. Police could find no evidence of an affair with any co-workers, and Franz said that she would never even consider cheating on Stephen with someone from work. Interestingly, some of the names listed were of elderly or retired co-workers, making it more likely that the letter was merely written to defame her. When the police confronted Stephen about the letters, he hired an attorney and stopped cooperating in the investigation. In 1999, 9 years after Dorene's disappearance, Stephen told his family members he was going on vacation to straighten out his life. Shortly after he returned, he shot and killed his ex-girlfriend Laura Vincent and seriously wounded her new boyfriend. He then drove to a secluded reservoir in Connecticut and committed suicide. He left a note for his mother which referred to his feelings of guilt about Dorene's disappearance, but did not say what happened to her. Stephen was never charged in connection with his wife's disappearance, but investigators believe he was responsible. A search of the area near where Stephen committed suicide turned up no trace of her remains, and as of today, she has never been found and the case remains unsolved. Brian Dylan Nisenfeld grew up in New Jersey and was an honors student in high school. After high school, he would attend Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. He is described as an introvert that enjoys reading, writing poetry, and listening to music. In January of 1997, 18-year-old Brian was beginning his second semester studying architecture. The architecture program was tough and he didn't do well his first semester, and he was also very homesick. He told his dad he was changing his major and assured him that he would do better the next semester. On January 31st, 1997, Brian received a threatening phone call from a former student at the college who said that he could get on campus and get him. The call scared Brian, so he called his father, Steve, at 12:30 a.m. and asked him to come to the university. His father told him to call campus security, and when he did, they told him to change his phone number. His advisor went to Brian's room and he refused to give the name of the caller. 7 days later, on February 6, 1997, Brian would go missing. Surprisingly, Brian's parents were not notified that he was missing until February 12th, almost a week after he disappeared. Later, Brian's mother received a mysterious call from an unknown woman who claimed that the administrator of the university and 2 faculty members were withholding information about the case. But then the phone line went dead. The university denied this claim and authorities found no evidence. The college officials were not forthcoming. 6 months later, on Labor Day weekend 1997, a woman and her daughter were walking along Hog Island in Narragansett Bay near campus when they discovered a shoe on the shore. When they looked in the shoe, they found part of a foot inside. DNA tests showed that the foot, along with a shin bone found nearby, belonged to Weil. They couldn't find any other remains. They do believe Brian is deceased, but they cannot determine what exactly happened. To some believe that Brian may have accidentally fallen into the river from the water's edge, or may have been distraught over personal problems or troubles in school and jumped from Mount Hope Bridge. The bridge is near Hog Island and is about 285 foot high, and Brian often spent time there writing poetry. However, his family and friends do not believe that he could have died accidentally or committed suicide and believe he was murdered. They also believe he may have been killed by the same person that was threatening him through the phone calls that occurred in the weeks before his disappearance. Josh Cohen later admitted to making the threatening phone calls. He was a friend of Brian's during his first semester, but the two had a falling out prior to Brian's disappearance. Josh said they were just made as a joke and that Brian had often made similar calls to him. His family believes that the former student was involved in Brian's disappearance and death, but the police do not believe he was involved. While Brian's parents do not believe the suicide theory, they do think it is possible that he may have accidentally fallen from the bridge. However, they lean toward believing their son was murdered and that Josh Cohen knows more than he is saying. Upset by the response at the university when his son vanished, Stephen Nisenfeld convinced the state representative to introduce legislation in Congress known as Brian's Law to require colleges and universities to notify parents if their children are missing for 24 hours. As of today, Brian has never been found and this case remains unsolved. Wendy Lee Madden was born March 6, 1968. On March 11, 1991, Wendy was just 5 days shy of turning 23. She was the youngest of 3 children and had a rough childhood. In 1991, she had recently moved from Woonsocket, Rhode Island to live with her mother at 53 Cross Street in Central Falls. It was a cold, frigid night when Wendy left her mother and boyfriend at their home to walk a couple minutes away to Store 24, now called ABC Liquors, to buy some cigarettes. It is believed she made it to the store and on her way home, she was seen talking to people closer to her house at 11:15 p.m. She was known for hanging out with an older and rough crowd. While she had no criminal record, she was allegedly dabbling in drugs and illegal activity. Later into the night, when she didn't show back up, her boyfriend and mother assumed she had gone to a friend's house like she often did. 2 days later, on March 13th in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, behind a small local bar called Jan's Place, a neighbor in the area would find her body. She had been strangled and sexually assaulted, but her official autopsy results have never been released to the public. Wendy had been known to occasionally hang out at that particular bar and may have been there on the night she went missing. Her case is still in active investigation, and the detective on her case now has a Facebook page dedicated to solving Wendy's case. Police have a person of interest, but the name of this person has not been released to the public. Donald Joseph Connell was born on October 31, 1958, and was nicknamed Donnie. In 1977, he graduated from the Rhode Island Middletown High School. He was very athletic and a very good baseball and basketball player. After school, he would join the U.S. Marine Corps just as his father had done before him. On December 2, 1986, in Newport, Rhode Island, 28-year-old Donnie left his parents' house at 6 Record Street and began walking to meet his sister who was on her way home. He was going to meet her at her place, which was only 1 street away. However, when she arrived, Donnie was nowhere to be found, and it is unknown if he ever even made it. Donnie was reported missing by his father 10 days later on December 12, 1986. Because he was an adult, law enforcement did not thoroughly investigate his disappearance as being foul play. At the time, missing persons were not broadcast or published in media as widely as they are now, and there was no major search for him. There was not even a newspaper article about his disappearance. His family and the Newport police detectives are still trying to obtain his medical and dental records, but are having a tough time. Donnie isn't on the Doe network yet, and that's due to the U.S. government not getting his medical records sent to his family for whatever reason. There are very few details available, and as of today, he has never been found and the case remains unsolved. Wojciech Fodali was born August 31, 1986 in Poland and grew up in Wilbraham, Massachusetts. He later moved to Rhode Island and attended the University of Rhode Island. In 2008, he graduated from the university with a bachelor's degree in international business. 6 months after he graduated on December 6, 2008, 22-year-old Voyek went to a bar called Charlie O's and then attended a party at a friend's home in the West Bay at 70 block of East Shore Road in Narragansett and stayed overnight. The group was awakened sometime after 5 a.m. to the sight of Voyek standing naked, hitting himself with a metal pole from the bed frame and saying, "Trust me." However, they were unable to get the pole from him, and he eventually calmed down and his friends returned back to sleep. When his friends woke up the next afternoon, Voyek was gone and the clothing he'd worn the night before was neatly folded on the floor. He also left his sneakers, car keys, cell phone, Massachusetts driver's license, debit card, and $86 in cash. Voyek was seen twice after he left his friend's home. The first sighting was by some neighbors who saw a naked man that resembled him sitting on a dock at 8:30 a.m. Later, a book was found left open to a section that read, "One with the Sea." The second sighting happened 2 hours later when a passerby saw him running towards a marsh, still nude, near Galilee Escape Road on the grounds of the 120-acre Galilee Bird Sanctuary. However, neither of these sightings have ever been confirmed to be him. Police canines searched the cove and nearby marsh but found nothing. His friends stated he seemed depressed and despondent prior to his disappearance and was acting oddly the last time they saw him. But his mother, Anna, spoke to him 3 days before he disappeared and stated that she didn't notice anything wrong. His roommates stated he had become interested in nature and very into religion, and had spent a great deal of time reading the Bible in the days before his disappearance. He began underdressing for the cold weather and would walk around outside with no shoes on. He talked about trying a simpler life and even mentioned possibly going on a bread and water diet. Voyek suffered from ADHD and anxiety and took medication to help, but his friends said he abruptly stopped taking them prior to his disappearance. Temperatures outside on the day Voyek disappeared was about 30 degrees, and he could not have survived long without his clothes. The day before he vanished, he was stopped by police on Newport's Cliff Walk. He wasn't wearing any shoes, and the police stated that he was inappropriately dressed for the weather and distraught. Around 3 a.m. on the morning, he was reported missing for an unknown reason. Police made a well-being check on one of his friends, Burton Wilkins, who was renting the home on East Shore Road. They noted that Voyek was present at the home at the time. Little did they know they'd soon be looking for him. Strangely, about a year after he disappeared, his mother received a phone call from someone with a childlike voice asking for Voyek. The call was traced to a woman in Puerto Rico. As more time passed, his mother found a post-it note in her kitchen with the following writing on it. His name was even spelled wrong on the post-it note. A handwriting analysis was brought in, but the results were inconclusive. It was just another curious lead that led nowhere. His mother believes that he is still alive. Sadly, she lost her oldest son to an overdose a few years before Voyek went missing. As of today, he has never been found and the case remains unsolved. Nancy Loggerquist on the night of Sunday, July 1st, 1990. Nancy Loggerquist, an icky 7-year-old resident at Riverside Healthcare Center, was last seen alive. At around 3:30 a.m., a care worker witnessed the elderly woman sound asleep in her bed. She was not distressed and appeared peaceful. The care worker closed her bedroom door and moved on to the next room. Nancy had been a resident at Riverside since December of 1988. Born in Hamilton, Montana in 1902, she graduated high school at the age of 18 and spent much of her life working as an executive secretary. Nancy was an active member of the Missoula Business and Professional Women's Club prior to her retirement. She never married, had no children, and had little in the way of relatives at the time of her death. Those family members, a sister, 2 nieces, and 3 nephews, didn't live near the care home. By all accounts, lived an ordinary life in the care home. She was unable to walk, and so she required around-the-clock assistance. There was nothing about her background to suggest there was a target on her back at the time of her death. At 4:30 a.m., 1 hour after Nancy was checked on at Riverside on July 1st, a worker checked on her room once more. This time, however, the alarm was raised. The 87-year-old was gone. The 5 employees on shift scattered across the building in an attempt to locate the elderly woman. But there was no sign of her. 11 minutes later, at 4:41 a.m., the police were alerted to Nancy's disappearance. Law enforcement promptly arrived on the scene, accompanied by search and rescue teams. They carried out an extensive search of the home and the surrounding area. The residence was located along the Clark Fork River, and boats manned by police officers were dispatched along the water. At 6:30 a.m., the search was called off. Authorities had found Nancy dead near the riverbank, about 30 minutes downstream from Riverside. She had been murdered in a manner that was described by police as ritualistic. The circumstances of her death were violent, stemming from sexual assault with an object. Her body was then dumped into the water. To investigators working on the case, it soon became apparent that they would have their work cut out for them. The fact that Nancy's body had been put in the water had washed away any traces of forensic evidence, and her diaper has never been located. The police have never put forward a theory about the weapon used in the murder, and it too has never been found. Detectives soon theorized the culprit had entered and exited through Nancy's bedroom window, which faced the river as the screen had been cut. However, the perpetrator had managed not to leave behind any evidence on the window or cell or in the rest of the bedroom. Furthermore, none of the alarms had gone off at any of the home's entrances and all were in working order. It's unclear if the home was dusted for prints, but given the amount of staff, residents, and guests coming and going from the home, it would have been a very arduous task if it had. The only lead in the case was a man seen by a member of staff at around 4 a.m. walking through the tar park of the neighboring Missoula Athletic Club, away from the river and towards East Broadway Street. He is described as being white between the ages of 30 and 40 and weighing around 180 to 200 pounds. He has light brown, collar-length hair, a mustache and brown-rimmed glasses, and was wearing an untucked white and brown striped t-shirts, tan button front shorts, and white tennis shoes with white socks. His t-shirt was longer at the back than the front. This man was never considered a suspect, but was wanted for questioning. However, it's unclear if he ever made contact with the police or was even identified by them. Reportedly, the description led to the police becoming inundated with reports. Due to Nazi's minimal family ties, a family connection was quickly ruled out, after which the authorities turned their attention to staff members. Staff at the care home would be familiar with its layout and its security measures and would know who was best to target. Investigators felt that the murder could well be an inside job and homed in on one male staff member in particular. He was eventually cleared of being involved, but left the care home less than a month later. It is unclear why he left. After ruling out the staff member, the police began to look at the possibility that the crime was the work of an outsider. They noted that security focused on the doors to the home, not the windows, and speculated that Nancy was picked because she was in a room facing onto the river and was not targeted for any reason more specific than that. They interviewed a man named James Bailey on multiple occasions, but eventually dropped in as a suspect. Eventually, detectives looked back at the witness statements they'd collected regarding any other potentially suspicious acts in the home. One nurse had drawn their attention to the demise of an 86-year-old woman named Bertha Scott, an Alzheimer's sufferer who was discovered dead in her bed on May 2, 1990. She was put into restraints at night to stop her from wandering off, and because she'd suffered from heart disease, her death was assumed to be from natural causes. Neither the staff nor her family felt her demise was suspicious, except for the one nurse who had noted a bruise on Bertha's neck. She was buried without autopsy. Around the time of Bertha's death, the care home staff had also noticed that there had been some tampering with the windows of the physical therapy room, although nothing ever really came of this. On the back of the nurse's comments, the police decided to exhume Bertha's body and double-check her cause of death. Her family was shocked when the police announced that she had actually been raped before being strangled to death. Bertha's life was rather different from Nancy's. She had been born in Pennsylvania in 1904 and was married 20 years later. She had moved to Missoula just 2 years before her death so that she could be closer to one of her surviving children. 4 of her 6 children had died before her, though she was succeeded by a vast number of grandchildren. During Bertha's medical examination, it was discovered that semen had been left behind. Although a sample was collected, it was too degraded to produce a DNA profile which would help the police find her killer. From here, both cases grew cold. In 1992, a man of another care home was arrested for sexually assaulting one of the residents. However, he was in prison at the time of the murders. The police also suspected Lloyd Chase Allen of being involved that same year, but he too was behind bars when the crimes were committed. In 2002, the Missoulian reported that several of the care home residents had spoken of a man who roamed the halls at night, but staff had never been sure if he was real or not, because the residents' memories and testimony were often unreliable. It's possible this man was real, and that there are more cases like Bertha's where residents were killed, but it was deemed that they had died from natural causes. However, without DNA evidence, a confession, or further investigation, it seems likely we will never see this case solved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.